A villain who is also a god? That already sounds impressive. But how impressive is it for everyday villains to elevate to god status? From average humans to the most inhuman, these villains all earned a sweet moment of godlike glory. Dr. Doom is always a villain that many people already put on a pedestal. So of course, it makes sense that he would eventually get powers to match his status. This all went down during the 2015 Secret Wars event when Dr. Doom was elevated to the status of not just Emperor, but God, becoming God Emperor Doom, after being the only person willing to challenge the Beyonders during the final moments of the incursion. When everything came crashing down, Doom took the power for himself and built a patchwork-like world out of all the alternate universes that had collided with one another. It was later revealed that to have absolute power and shape reality, he'd actually been using the powers of Molecule Man, who was kept hidden away. Eventually, in a battle against his rival Reed Richards, Doom lost these powers after admitting that Reed probably would have been able to do a better job at recreating the multiverse following the incursions, thereby causing Molecule Man to instead choose to bestow his power to Mr. Fantastic. Nanaue wasn't always known for being a demigod and prince. In the previous New Earth continuity, he is hinted at being the son of the king of all sharks, also known as the Shark God, although this was all kind of seen as a rumor in regards to his origin. Initially, it wasn't very concrete. He wouldn't become a god over time necessarily, but instead would have this origin more firmly established as being his true origin as time went on in the comics. In the Prime Earth continuity and the Harley Quinn animated series today, this is firmly cemented as King Shark's origins, making him a demigod. In fact, even in the newest Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League game, he's also a god. Like his father, Thane also has experience with wielding an insane amount of power. Initially though, Thane strove to simply be a healer in his everyday. He was eventually hunted down by Thanos, who was searching for his secret hidden son. Thane, being an Inhuman, didn't have powers yet when Ebony Maw first found him, but as a hybrid Inhuman and Eternal child, his powers were triggered and brought to the surface after undergoing Terrigenesis. This drastically changed his appearance and gave him an insta-kill power, where everyone within a certain, rather large radius of him would be killed simply by being near him, which is a pretty traumatizing thing to happen when you're like, I want to save people. Oh my gosh, my powers kill everyone. He could also encase people in amber. In fact, if you've heard of the story where Kitty Pryde helped Star-Lord save Spartax from the Brood after the entire planet was encased in amber, the person who had done the encasing, yeah, that was Thane. Thane would not only have insane power just from these abilities, but also would for a time have, get this, the Phoenix Force. Don't worry though, Thane would later lose the Phoenix Force after becoming trapped in the God Quarry, where he remains, or at least where he remains at the time of this recording, until I guess we remember him and pull him out of the God Quarry. There is a lot that Zod has done to sell himself as a god tier character. I feel like every time we see him, he's doing something even more extra than the last time. During the Prime Earth continuity, there's a point where Amanda Waller is lucky or unlucky enough perhaps to capture Zod to use him on her Task Force X, aka the Suicide Squad. However, even after having an explosive kryptonite device placed within his brain, Zod escapes Waller. Yeah. Does his own brain surgery, basically. Tormented by the pain of his family who are currently trapped inside the Phantom Zone, he manages to remove the bomb from his head by himself using his heat vision to break free and go rescue his family. After doing so, he also seeks out a planet for them to settle on to turn into a sort of new Krypton. The indigenous people of this planet are actually willing to work for Zod as they believe him and his family to be gods. Madeline Pryor was kind of born a god when you think about it. She is a clone of Jean Grey, whose life was sparked by a piece of the Phoenix Force. The Phoenix Force itself is like a cosmic god of sorts. It's not like, I don't know if we call it a god like officially, but it's godlike in power. And because a piece of that is built into Maddie, in a way, Maddie is also like a god. If you're wondering how or why I'm including her here when she, as I've said, has always been a god, since this is the exact reason I'm not including villains like Loki on this list, so for all of you who are wondering why Loki isn't here, that's why I didn't include him, it has to do with the fact that she wasn't always aware of her true origin. During the time she wasn't aware, Maddie simply acted like a normal human woman. However, after suffering a mental break, Maddie was transformed into a after suffering a mental break when she realized the truth of her origin, Maddie was transformed into a supremely powerful being, allowing her to tap into her true, unlimited potential. Poison Ivy is a character who honestly should always be at a god tier, just based on her power set honestly, but there's only really ever been one point that I can think of where she decided to take things to that kind of level. For the most part, Ivy stays pretty confined to Gotham, giving Batman and the city trouble with her eco-terror, but not really extending much beyond Gotham's reach. Now and then, I've seen her also go to some other cities, I've seen her go on a crime spree with Harley in Metropolis as well, but really she stays pretty confined to a single city with her mischief. However, in the Tom King story, Everyone Loves Ivy, trauma caused Ivy to strike out and go bigger, much bigger, taking over the whole world through vegetables. Yeah, she mind controlled people through the veggies that they ate, and she used her control over everyone to basically make the world a better place and bring about kind of world peace, but of course at the expense of free will. A big no-no in the hero books. Ivy, however, was convinced to relinquish control by Harley Quinn, who Batman and Catwoman basically recruited to help them deal with this situation, and ended up giving up her influence and her power at the end of the story as a result. Owen Reese was just a normal man before he received powers that made him a god, or at least put him on that level. He was a lab technician when one day, fixing an atomic device, he just poked a hole through the universe and into the multiverse, accidentally reaching across space and time into the universe of the Beyonders, and tapping into a massive amount of power there. This power would put him on an omnipotent and omniscient level, allowing him to rearrange the molecules of matter and even energy. He could even do that with organics, although for a long time there was a psionic barrier in place so that he wouldn't do that, because it's pretty messed up, even for a villain. Molecule Man can also warp reality on a massive galactic scale. It's really weird to think of this next villain as a god, but even he has earned that status before in the comics. I know, it's crazy. And strangely, it's actually happened more than once, sort of. The other version of the character who was imbued with god powers was from an alternate reality, admittedly, but even in the main continuity, Joker has gone god tier. In this case, it all went down when he managed to trick Superman fan and often mischievous antagonist, Mr. Mxyzptlk. Mr. Mxyz only intended to give Joker 0.01% of his power, but instead, he accidentally gave him 99.99%. Yeah, yikes. Needless to say, Joker most definitely did not use this power to do anything good. Eating China as though it were takeout, yeah, super weird and super scary, and tormenting Batman daily and killing him only to res him the next day so that he could do that all over again. It should surprise no one that of course there was a time when Thanos became an almost literal god. When and where was this? In an alternate future that ended up being erased, but where CGR, aka Cosmic Ghost Rider, still hails from, even though it doesn't exist. This was a future where Thanos had committed to winning over Death's Heart by destroying not just half of all life in the galaxy, but all life in the galaxy. He had eradicated life down to the point that only a few people remained, and eventually only he did. This King Thanos, who was a ruler of the universe, brought in his past self to eliminate him. However, this reality was erased when the younger Thanos refused to do his older self's bidding, and despite all his power, still saw King Thanos as being weak. Rude. Cersei went from being a very powerful witch to being a literal goddess. How did this happen? Well, in Justice League Dark, we learned of the Witch-Marked, powerful women who had pieces of Hecate's power hidden away within themselves. Diana Prince, aka Wonder Woman, is revealed to be one of these individuals as we discover, who they all are, or so we think, as it's later revealed that Cersei was also secretly one of Hecate's chosen Witch-Marked. She uses her attachment to Hecate to devise a plot to steal all the power from the other Witch-Marked and Hecate herself. Cersei actually succeeds in this, surprisingly, and so gains a godly amount of power, putting her on on the level of the goddess of magic, Hecate herself. In fact, because there is no Hecate after that, she basically is the new Hecate. Pretty crazy. Number 10. The Inheritors. The Inheritors are Morland's crew and family. The clan Morland himself is also a part of. They're a powerful energy vampire clan which hunt down various totems and consume them. Because yeah, there aren't just spider totems out there apparently. I want to know though, are there anteater totems, and can I be one? Please write me into a comic as an anteater totem. Someone, please. Spider totems, for those who don't know, are spider folks from across the multiverse who are basically destined to end up being connected to the spirit of the spider, either possessing powers related to the spider or some other important connection which generally gives them purpose. The Inheritors ended up getting control over the Master Weaver and used their knowledge and power to traverse the multiverse and hunt down spider totems within it. The Inheritors are generally led by Solus or Morland, and the clan has included Verna, Genix, Karn, Bora, Brix, Dara, Deimos, Malos, Mortia, Namura, and Thanos. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that like button? Seriously, it feeds the algorithm and it feeds my soul. Number 9. Miriam Drew, or rather, a bunch of Miriam's Drews. Many of them. An army of them. A clone army of Miriam Drews. Who was Miriam Drew, you might be asking? Jessica Drew's mother. In the previous Spider-Woman series by Carlo Pacheco and Pere Perez, Jessica had to face off against a bunch of her mom's clones, after learning that the woman whose base she was in wasn't really her mother but instead a clone of her. After watching her mom go from loving and considerate, seemingly having missed her daughter, to violent and aggressive, blaming Jessica for basically everything that had gone wrong in her life, Jessica then basically had to fight off an entire army of her mom's clones, ultimately. Like Jess at the time, her clone moms were also juicin', which also made them scary foes to face both in form and in power. If you don't believe me, read the series. Number 8. Zodiac. Zodiac is a blast from the past. He was a villain who was first introduced in 2010, but only recently reappeared in the comics, pledging to become Moon Knight's sworn nemesis. A very different vibe from Raul Bushman, honestly. Zodiac reminds me more of Joker or Deadpool when it comes to his antics. He's both brilliant, but also criminally insane. But it is his penchant for creative and deadly thinking that makes him honestly so dangerous. Like when he took on Moon Knight's ally, Reese, a vampire, not with a cross around his neck, but instead wearing his own name around his neck, as he clarified that it actually wasn't the cross vampires were weak to, it was faith, and Zodiac believes devoutly in only one thing: Zodiac. Number 7. Tyler Stone. Alchemax is a future villainous corporation from the 2099 Marvel Universe of Earth 928. But of course, a corporation is only ever as evil as the people behind it. One of which is, of course, Tyler Stone, the vice president of Alchemax's R&D department. Tyler Stone is not only VP of Research and Development at Alchemax, but he is also secretly Miguel O'Hara's, aka Spider-Man 2099's, biological father. Miguel doesn't learn until later on that he is Stone's son, and ends up working for Alchemax as a brilliant geneticist. When he tries to leave, however, it is Stone who slips him the highly addictive and expensive substance Rapture, made exclusively by Alchemax, to prevent him from leaving. Fortunately, Miguel manages to free himself by becoming his own experimental test subject, accidentally becoming the spider-like hero, Spider-Man 2099. Number 6. Zombie Ant-Man. In the Marvel Zombies world, Black Panther was one of the sole survivors when the zombies first attacked, and turned most of his friends into zombified versions of themselves. One such former friend, Hank Pym, actually just managed to trick T'Challa into coming with him. Or well, he almost did. Either way, Hank managed to trick T'Challa enough to get him to a place where he could basically incapacitate him and then hide him away. Having already begun to change himself, Hank basically planned to use Black Panther, his friend, as a food source. Because Hank is a genius, which means when he's a zombie, he's a really dangerous genius. Hank kept him locked away and alive while slowly savoring and devouring his friend. Fortunately, Black Panther would escape and even become the leader of a land of survivors, although he would eventually turn into a zombie himself, much later on. But lesson learned, watch out for zombie Hank Pym if there's a zombie apocalypse. Number 5. Taskmaster. In the comics, Tony Masters is Taskmaster, and he is well known as an Avengers villain. And it is through his clashes with that team that Taskmaster also became a recurring villain of Hawkeye as well. Now, you might not know it to just look at Taskmaster, but the two have had some pretty epic fights over the years, with Masters himself also possessing marksmanship skills to rival that of, get this, Hawkeye himself, and also being known as a villain who is proficient with the use of a bow and trick arrows. In the comics, Taskmaster has an eidetic memory, or a photographic memory, that also extends to him being able to replicate pretty much any abilities or skill sets that he sees. So while he can also mimic Hawkeye's skills and abilities, he can also match the fighting style of pretty much anyone he watches, as well as learn their specific skill set too just from watching it, as long as it isn't a superpower specific skill like, you know, flying. Taskmaster is also known for being a brilliant tactician as a mercenary, and often uses strategic thinking to take down opponents who are more powerful than him, which is why he's one you honestly need to watch out for. Number 4. Xemnu. Xemnu is also known as the Living Hulk, and is a being that uses hypnosis powers to take control of others' minds. On more than one occasion, he has attempted to use these powers to try and conquer Earth and bend the minds of its entire populace to his will. In fact, while he's also attempted this feat in the pages of Immortal Hulk, this was also something he tried in his very first appearance. Back then, he was trying to mind control the human race in order to get them to build a ship to basically return him home. Doesn't sound like such an evil plan until you realize the force that the ship would have to create would basically rip the Earth asunder once that ship took off, due to the great force that it would need for that launch. So, pretty evil. Number 3. High Evolutionary. As we saw in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, the High Evolutionary is truly a villain to be feared. And honestly, when I found out that the High Evolutionary was going to be in the MCU, I was like, man, that's gonna be lame, because on paper, he's another kind of silly character, especially when you consider that he's often used as a scapegoat for retcons, bizarre origins, and honestly pretty weird plot points. The fact remains though, the High Evolutionary, as the film proves, is truly the be-all and end-all of Marvel's mad science department, and the god complex he has in the MCU basically sums up so beautifully what is so frightening about him when you really think about it. He thinks he's perfecting life, when really he's basically warping and polluting it. Number 2. Thane. Thane is Thanos' son, and while he might not look that intimidating, he's definitely proven himself to be deadly in the past. Initially, Thanos was hunting down Thane because he feared Thane's potential power surmounting his own. He's basically afraid that Thane will rise up and overtake him, but in the end this wasn't something that Thanos really had to be particularly afraid of, it turned out. Even after he became empowered with the Phoenix Force, Thanos still managed to somehow defeat Thane, and this was also at a point when Thanos seemed himself to kind of be dying. Thane ended up being stripped of the Phoenix Force and ended up sentenced to suffering a hell-like existence in the God Quarry for the rest of his life. Or at least until some writer remembers he's still down there and decides to pull him back up again. Thane was also an Inhuman, and his powers are actually perfect for someone who is known to be Thanos' son, and are also pretty OP, I gotta say. He had a Death Touch ability that, while untamed, basically killed anyone within a certain radius, and he could also trap people in a state of living death through encasing them in amber, which honestly sounds awful. Honestly, while he's in prison for now, I'd watch out whenever he gets out of that God Quarry and is free again. Number 1. Monarch. I feel like we're always sleeping somewhat on Jamie Braddock here, and we honestly don't talk about him enough, so I'm gonna bump him up to the top spot this time around. Monarch to you. Monarch is known for his reality warping powers, and while not always a villain, most of the time in the comics he has basically been a villain. What makes him different from other reality warping characters, and namely mutants out there? Monarch's powers work on a quantum level, and although there are people who can influence Monarch's powers by manipulating his mind, he also is pretty powerful as someone who can basically just make things happen by thinking them into existence. Yeah. He is the elder brother of twins Brian and Elizabeth Braddock, but despite being related to heroes, he seldom is one himself.
Thanos might be a universal threat and tough to beat, but without his fancy glove, he is not at the top of the food chain. With a name like Apocalypse, yeah, you're gonna be a problem. Apocalypse can't be permanently killed. He can die, he will come back though. He's the youngest on this list, I think. The baby, he's only about 5,000 years old. Apocalypse is an external mutant. That means the resurrection resurrection thing is part of his mutation. It's not a common mutation, he's special and different. He was recruited by the Celestials to join the line of Guardians. The Celestials took him away, added some celestial tech to his body, making him even more powerful than when he started. To stay alive as long as he has, he must hibernate like a bear, then when he wakes up, he makes a mess, then goes back to sleep. One time, he woke up and then almost immediately tried to start a war between humans and mutants and take over the world. Apocalypse can regenerate himself from a single drop of blood, he can alter his body in a variety of ways, like make himself taller, he can fly, disintegrate you with a little tap of the finger, teleport, wield magic, absorb energy, plus more. He's someone you want on your side. Thankfully, in the end, he joins the X-Men by agreeing to live on Krakoa and follow the laws there. Picture the sun, like at its blazing peak. That's a lot of energy and power, right? Now multiply that by 1,000. Not to be your 8th grade math teacher with an odd math question, I swear, I'm going somewhere. That somewhere is Surtur. Surtur has all that power as established in Journey into Mystery 104. It also establishes that he can create a circle of pure flaming energy that is powerful enough to destroy an entire galaxy. That's just him, as himself, no absorbing other power or wielding anything. But he can wield, if you were wondering, specifically the Twilight Sword, or the Sword of Doom. It was made using a galaxy that blew up and is now constantly on fire. It's called the Burning Galaxy, because what else would you call it? In a bit of tragedy, or irony, or however you want to view it, the sword ended up being Surtur's demise in the end. So with all his power, Surtur can be killed, just only by an object of immense power greater than 1,000 suns, or when he's not tied to one. The Twilight Sword was almost kinda like a Horcrux for Surtur. The first time he was beat, Thor had to destroy the sword before they could destroy the demon, and then the second time he was beat was using the sword. The sword was no longer tied to him, so it meant that his head could take a permanent vacation from his body. But just because the demon has been beat doesn't mean it was easy. He is less a physical energy and more just unstoppable force. Dormammu against Thanos is an interesting case. There is no denying that Dormammu is intensely powerful. His power comes from where he rules and lives, the Dark Dimension. When he's in there, it has been established that there is no fight that he can't win. He also has all the demons of the realm at his disposal, making a pretty terrifying army. But since he draws his power from his dimension, when he leaves it, he gets weaker. So in the event that Thanos were to fight him or face off somewhere that wasn't the Dark Dimension, Thanos does have a slightly better chance at winning, but probably only if he has the Infinity Gauntlet. Thanos on his own, super powerful, stronger than the Hulk, can take a hit from Thor's hammer, and can handle wearing the Infinity Gauntlet. But despite all that, he can be killed. Dormammu can't. It's never been done. If you kill him, you kill his dimension, which is near impossible to do. Thanos, without his special mitten, wouldn't stand a chance. Ego the Living Planet has caused many a problem for many a Marvel hero and villain. The way to destroy Ego is to destroy his core, and that is hard to do. It did happen, but then he just reformed himself later, so does that really count as death, or was it just rest and rejuvenate period? To survive, this man planet started absorbing other planets, that is so heavy metal. He battled Galactus twice. The first time he won with the assistance of Thor, but that doesn't mean he wasn't doing fine on his own. The second time Galactus showed up, Ego had gone insane, and Galactus didn't even want to touch that. Literally noped out of there, got help. Galactus goes to Thor, describes Ego as a menace that even he stands powerless against. The first time Ego was destroyed, the gravitational pull of the sun got hold of him. He tried to run, but crumbled instead. I looked it up. Earth's gravitational pull is about 9.8 meters per second squared. The sun's is 274 meters per second squared. But even though the sun was his ending, it was also his new beginning. The energy from it activated Ego's photosynthetic form of revitalization, and he got himself back together. He later fought a clone of himself, Alter Ego, and won. Good job. But it turns out Ego the Living Planet is only a small part of a big super ego. Super ego is a living bioverse. It's partially sentient. It's sentient enough to get us specific enough with who it's trying to attack. The Stranger, a cosmic scientist with a knack for experimentation, showed up and created Ego, Alter Ego, and Super Ego. Super Ego looks like an Ego universe, basically. He's got more bells and whistles, longer tentacles, more power, things like that. Super Ego is also powerful enough to go up against an army of Celestials. There's at least 100 that he goes up against. The Celestials are gods to the Eternals, the Celestials created the Eternals, and Thanos is an Eternal, just in case anyone forgot. Super Ego is presumably defeated, but it took a long time. Thanos has mentioned fearing Galactus before. In Thanos Annual 1, future Thanos shows past Thanos that they scrap with Galactus, and past Thanos says, "Am I out of my mind taking on that cosmic powerhouse?" Later in the same issue, future Thanos shows what he considers to be like the top of the power pyramid. Galactus is in the bottom row, but that's out of every being Thanos has ever encountered and fought. He's on the same plane as Odin, Zeus, Stranger, Kronos, and a Celestial. That's a good lineup. Galactus is literally known as the Devourer of Worlds. He is a cosmic being, so he has the power cosmic. It's just unlimited cosmic energy, that's what it is. Battles between Galactus and other equal powers have literally shifted reality. He is considered by Nova Corps to be a universal threat, much like Thanos. I agree. His main weakness is his power has to be nourished. The nourishment in question: planets, whole planets. If he doesn't eat planets, he will starve and die. But if he eats extra planets, he gets extra power. He has gone up against the Mad Celestials and beat one, but there were 4, so he was outnumbered. Galactus is destined to be around forever and can move faster than the speed of light, despite the fact that he's like 18 tons and just under 29 feet tall. He has the power to throw devastating energy blasts, teleport, resurrect the dead, manipulate souls, mess with time, so the stones are probably not needed for him, except for one thing. See, Galactus, while he is a villain, he eats planets, he doesn't want to do that, he has to. So he did go out for the Infinity Gems in Thanos 4, but was going to use them to alter his own being to not be a planet eater anymore. It didn't work, but it's a thought that counts. So the Celestials, as established previously, they made the Eternals. The Celestials go from planet to planet visiting the people there. They basically are trying to find a species worthy of having Eternals. That's their main mission. If a species is deemed unworthy or fails their Eternals, then goodbye, no one survives, which is why the Celestials are sometimes considered villains. The Celestials look as menacing as they are. There are so many of them. There are about 35 that we know of, but in the fight with Super Ego, there's an army there, like at least 100. The Celestials range in size. For reference, Thanos is about 6 feet 7 inches. One of the tallest known Celestials is about 20,000 feet tall. That's like putting a water bottle next to the CN Tower. Most are just a short 2,000 feet though. Celestials are never seen without their armor. The only time we've ever seen a Celestial without their helmet was in Eternals Volume 4, Issue 9. He takes off his helmet and his head is just a flaming ball of energy. The power of the Celestials is unlimited. The Asgardian gods can't fight against them, so Odin created this super armor infused with powers from everyone on Asgard except Thor. But when he sent a blast from it, a flick of a celestial hand, and it was gone. Time and space mean nothing. They're immortal. Even if they are killed, it's not clear if they're gone or just go somewhere else. They don't need the Infinity Stones, maybe power if they had to pick, but most of the other stuff they can just do. In the rare event that every Celestial dies, even just one staying alive can revive the entire race. There aren't many things that can kill a Celestial, but the Beyonders can. They reside in the Beyond. It's outside the multiverse. I can't comprehend that, so I'm just gonna accept it. They were the creations of the Celestials. A Beyonder kid created Secret Wars, that weird gladiator match from the 80s. A child did that. An adult is so much worse. The Beyonders launched a coordinated attack where they all attacked the Celestials at the same time and killed all but one. The reason the Beyonders were acting up was because they wanted to destroy the multiverse to get rid of someone else and then hoped when it restarted that guy would be gone. So if you tried to stop them blowing up the multiverse, they had no choice but to go after you. They also took out other entities like Lord Chaos, Master Order, Eternity, the In-Betweener, Infinity, and the Living Tribunal. That's a lot of powerful people. They have the power to build entire universes at their fingertips. Their only limit is they are confined to their own timeline. No time travel. Very sad. They can shift realities, just not like time travel in traditional sense, I guess. Like a lot of people on this list, they don't really need the Infinity Stones, but if they did want one, my guess is they would choose time. Logos is loco. They started out as 3 things: Master Order, Lord Chaos, and the In-Betweener. After the Beyonders destroyed the 7th form of the universe, the 8th form was created, and in this one, Galactus evolved into a force of creation. Master Order and Lord Chaos, they liked it better when he was a force of destruction, so they tried to get him to go back. But the Living Tribunal said, no, Galactus is perfect the way he is. Order and Chaos didn't like that, so they eliminated the Tribunal so they could be the top of multiversal law. They combined together right after that so they could really be top of the food chain. And now they are Loco Logos. Their name is actually just Logos, I just think they're really unhinged. They can also kill Celestials, and they did. It's just assumed that Logos has unlimited power. Master Order and Lord Chaos were regarded by a gauntlet-wielding Thanos to be more powerful than Galactus, someone Thanos already thought was immensely powerful. Thankfully, Logos was split back into his 3 pieces. He was too powerful otherwise. I just briefly mentioned the Living Tribunal, and he's the representative for someone called the One Above All. That's also a Celestial's name, but this ain't about him. The One Above All here we're talking about is literally literally the top of it all. He's all things lovely and good. His twin though? Demon. His name is one below all. So above represents love and creation, below represents hate and destruction. Below was created when above got really, really mad. It's like he literally split in half. The one below all has one thought: destroy. Seriously, that is his only purpose. He wants to destroy everything. His power is limitless. He can and will destroy the entire multiverse on his own. His weakness is that he literally has no thoughts, head empty. So if he ever needs to make a concrete plan, he does need to get a host with a brain. Most of the time, he doesn't need a host. The one above all literally keeps below locked up somewhere away from the multiverse. Again, my brain can't comprehend that, so I'll just accept it, and only releases below when it's time to reset everything. So he comes out, destroys everything, then gets locked away again until it's time to do it again. What's pretty cool about the below is that he is the source of the mutagenic third gamma energy form, the form that creates hope.
Not all villains can be as well respected and feared as Doctor Doom, Thanos, Darkseid, or Rita Repulsa, but there are still many villains out there who deserve to be. Starting off this list supremely strong, we are talking about Mr. Sinister. What makes Mr. Sinister so great? Well, he's not really just one person anymore, but many different people kinda all combined together, or well, split, but you know, all joined by the fact that they're all a version of Sinister. Are you confused yet? Don't be. Allow me to explain. A while ago in the comics, we learned that while we believed that Nathaniel Essex had basically transformed into Mr. Sinister, it turned out that Nathaniel Essex had actually kinda just died, and Mr. Sinister had instead taken his place. And then we learned it wasn't just Mr. Sinister who was created to do this, but instead 4 clones total, each one different with their own focus in terms of the answer to evolution, which means that Sinister is so much more than Sinister at this point. That plus his own recent accomplishment of conquering all mutants and creating his own reality, which was shaped in his own image and sense of Sinister, is what makes him so powerful. Basically, don't underestimate Sinister. Speaking of those who aren't what they seem, Brother Blood recently claimed to have been turning over a new leaf during his appearance in the Titan series. Now, I wasn't buying his claims myself though, because I know just how dastardly and dangerous this villain can be. Although that being said, while I didn't believe he'd come over to the side of good, I was excited to see him. I don't think Brother Blood ever gets enough love, so I'm always super excited to see him appear in the comics. Brother Blood has been a long-standing Titans villain, and he's quite frightening to be honest with you. Brother Blood's powers allow him to take complete control of anyone whose blood he possesses, so if he ended up with a lot of superpowered blood on his hands, you can imagine just how unstoppable he could be. Or not even on his hands, just in his possession. This next villain could have been iconic due to how old he is in comic book history, but unfortunately his first story in the comics left him without any way to continue his career of crime at that time. We're talking about one of the first mutant villains to have ever appeared, the X-Men villain, Vanisher. Vanisher made his first appearance in issue number 2 of the X-Men, making him the second mutant villain to ever appear in X-Men comics. Unless you count, I guess, Professor X as the well-meaning X-Men villain he sometimes is. Issue number 1 saw the X-Men go up against Magneto. Issue number 2 saw them take on the Vanisher, who due to his teleportation abilities, which he also gets from being a mutant, was seemingly unstoppable. The issue was the team wasn't really strong enough to know how to handle his power set, especially since they didn't have anyone who could do anything similar to Vanisher. So in essence, Vanisher gave the entire X-Men team a run for their money in his very first appearance. In the end, Charles is forced to intervene and defeat Vanisher by wiping his memory so that he doesn't even remember having powers. Yikes, brutal. Seriously though, who was the real villain there? Just saying. Charles, when I read him do that, I was like, Charles, please, ruin this entire man's life. I don't think Vanisher even remembers his name after that. He's like, I don't even know who I am. Transitioning over to another character that we really don't talk about enough on the channel, I'm focusing this point on Golden Glider. Who is Golden Glider? Leonard Snart's sister, Lisa. While in The Flash she is given her name by Cisco after he makes a golden gun for her, in the comics she actually gets her name kind of from her own abilities, which allow her to astral project, and while in her astral state move at an insane speed, just gliding around. Hence why she's a good Flash villain. Not only that, but but Lisa Snart can use her powers to also cancel out the Speed Force temporarily. Still pretty impressive, even if it's temporary. If Golden Glider is one of the most underappreciated villains on the Rogues team, or Rogues affiliated anyways, depending on the story and the continuity, Sandman is one of those members of the Sinister Six, who often falls by the wayside as well. However, Sandman is actually insanely powerful and terrifying if you ask me. He can control the sand he's made up of and use it to increase his mass, his size, and strength significantly, making him more dangerous than most other human-sized villains that are out there. He can also easily escape, as he can reduce his size and density as well, making it easier for him to get away, shrink up, and just slither off his sand. He can also increase his density, making him extremely durable. He's also virtually immortal now that he's all sand, and he doesn't require food or drink to live, or even, honestly, air to breathe. In a similar vein to Sandman, we have Clayface. Clayface comes to us not from Marvel, but instead from DC, and is primarily known as a Batman villain. He can shapeshift as well, making him a hard character for someone like Batman to deal with. Batman is typically known for his deduction skills, and as a shapeshifter, Clayface is harder therefore for Batman to track down. This is also why Clayface is such a strong ally to Batman as well, during the times when Batman did manage to reform and recruit Basil to the Bat family. While people might consider Clayface as more of a joke villain somewhat, in part thanks to his marvelous appearance in the hilarious Harley Quinn animated series as a member of Harley's crew, the fact remains that his abilities are impressive, including size alteration, density control, shapeshifting, super strength, super durability, and Carlo can even mimic people's powers because he adopts not just their appearance and their likeness and their voice, but also basically is just copying their DNA. So yeah, he can have superpowers too. Clayface and Sandman are definitely both impressive for their power set, but when it comes to fighting prowess, this next villain is honestly pretty hard to beat. Not only that, but he is insanely intelligent, which also helps him to navigate more challenging fights where he might be at a disadvantage going in. We're talking about Tony Master's Taskmaster. While Taskmaster might have a kind of goofy name, his power set is honestly pretty impressive. He has photographic reflexes. What does that mean? It allows him to learn any style of fighting or martial arts simply by watching it. His abilities don't end there either. He can even learn other useful physical skills, such as sleight of hand, just by observing them. If you're wondering how I could put someone like Taskmaster above someone like Clayface, who not only can shapeshift but also can mimic other heroes and villains' powers, it's because while Taskmaster isn't himself as powerful, he has defeated other characters who are much more powerful than he is, or even, I would say, Clayface is. For example, when he used his tactical skills, his smart planning, and sense of prediction to defeat Hyperion, who's basically like a version of Superman but with Marvel Comics, or one of their versions of Superman. Speaking of villains with goofy names, Captain Cold is Leonard Snart. He is not one goofy name, but kind of two goofy names, both his villain mantle and his civilian name, Captain Cold and Leonard Snart. And while he might have goofy names and kind of a goofy look and kind of a goofy weapon, he's still actually pretty effective as a Flash villain. That is in great part due to his power set or equipment being the opposite of his rivals, the Flash. While the Flash can obviously move extremely fast, Cold can slow everything down thanks to his power over temperature, freezing basically everything around him. Not only that, but Snart is also a leader, which means he doesn't usually work alone, often having his other teammates on the Rogues to back him up. He's cunning, he's resourceful, and he's also a genius as well. The next villain is another one that I feel often doesn't get hyped enough for her power. We're talking about Mystique. Mystique might not be on the level of other Marvel villains like Apocalypse or Galactus or Hela even, but she's not someone that you should underestimate either. Most people think of her as being a lower level villain in terms of her power set because she's just a shapeshifter. I don't know what it is, but I think in general we just don't consider shapeshifting to be that powerful of an ability. But here's the thing, even though as of right now she is on a list with other shapeshifters who some may even be surprised to see I've put her above, the fact is that Mystique is one of the best shapeshifters around because she doesn't leave stuff up to chance. She doesn't just rely on her power set. Unlike Sandman for a long time, she wasn't able to shapeshift into just any size or shape or anything. Typically she was kind of limited to humans or humanoid beings and was reserved to a shape that shared the same mass as herself, having to stretch herself out or condense her mass depending on the size of the individual that she was impersonating. She also couldn't copy straight DNA, so she wouldn't have the powers nor even the vocal cords, to be honest, of the person that she was mimicking. So Mystique actually had to make up for all of that with her own skill sets, making her a master impersonator and actor able to convince you she's pretty pretty much anyone thanks to her observational skills and the hard work that she puts in. And to me, I not only think that's more impressive, I also think that honestly makes her more powerful. Because even if, you know, something were to happen, she didn't have her powers, she would still be pretty OP. This next villain also gets a bad, or should I say good, rep from people believing that he is the weaker version of his counterpart. We're talking about Bizarro, the Bizarro clone or possibly otherworldly reflection of Superman, depending on the origin that you're going with and the story that we're referring to, because there's been many different Bizarros throughout the years. Bizarro, however, overall might not always be as brilliant or as beautiful as Superman, although sometimes he is pretty brilliant, but he's still got similar powers to one of the most powerful superheroes of all time in all of comic book history, Superman. And that should be enough for me to crown him with our top spot, so hats off to you, Bizarro.
There are so many crazy characters in Marvel Comics that some just get kind of forgotten sometimes, especially when it comes to villains, because those guys can get defeated and either sent to the afterlife or locked up in prison and we never have to think about them again. For example, we've got Armless Tiger Man. Gustav Hertz worked in a mechanical laboratory in Munich, Germany during the 1940s. Now unfortunately for Hertz, one day his arms got caught in a machine and had to be amputated. While this is a horrible thing to happen to anybody, Gustav did survive the experience and he was later given reading material on how to operate day to day without arms, instead using his mouth and feet to complete daily tasks. Turns out that he was really good at this. Hertz developed ridiculous skill in using his teeth and feet. He even took things a couple steps further. He sharpened his teeth into fangs so that he could bite people, and he even developed above average levels of strength and dexterity in his jaw, legs, and toes, allowing him to bend steel with his mouth, kick really hard, and throw daggers with his toes. He ended up proving how capable he was as a World War II enemy of the hero Angel and Wakanda, where he was completely destroyed by that era's Black Panther. What was really surprising was when he reappeared in Incredible Hercules number 129 to 131 in 2009. He was among a group of individuals that were the Greek god Pluto's jury of the undead, and they together put Zeus on trial and subdued Hercules himself. Past that though, Armless Tiger Man has appeared one more time in Ziggy Pig's Silly Seal Comics Volume 2, number 1 in 2019, and let's be honest, no one really read that. Now, Hulk villains are always a fun thing to talk about because they are either super smart or incredibly powerful, both of which make for a fun read. The character Ravage is one villain that is both of those things wrapped into one, which makes it all the more puzzling that he has completely disappeared. Dr. Jeffrey Crawford was a former mentor of Bruce Banner, who used the Hulk's gamma radiation to cure himself of a debilitating neuromuscular disease, while pretending that he was trying to help Banner cure himself of the Hulk persona. Unfortunately, like a good chunk of others who subject themselves to gamma, Crawford became a big old green monster who was subject to fits of rage. But unlike a good chunk of other gamma mutates, Jeffrey kept his wits and was both an incredibly strong villain able to rival the Hulk physically, but also cunning and able to outthink the Hulk as well. He had this plan to try and become Ravage full-time instead of only temporarily hulking out. Banner had to team up with General Ross to try and bring him down, resulting in a huge brawl between the two Green Goliaths, but it was actually Major Talbot who used a cryogenic inducer to freeze Ravage, and he was kept in suspended animation at Gamma Base being researched for ways to defeat the Hulk himself, and the last mention of him was way back in 1998. What always boggles me is when a villain has an absolutely huge backstory that ties into the Elder Gods and the greater Marvel godly planes, but then they just never show up. For example, Echidna, or Echidna, however you want to pronounce it. Echidna or Echidna was an Elder Spawn, the granddaughter of the Elder God known as Set, who is a big deal in Marvel Comics. Set was the first Elder God to realize that he could steal the power of his other Elder Gods by consuming them, which kicked off a whole massive war between the Elder Gods, turning most of them into demons. So his granddaughter is not someone to mess with. Echidna is the mother of all monsters. She made Angerboda, Cerberus, Chimera, the Lernean Hydra, the Nemean Lion, and the Sphinx, just to name a few. Despite that though, in the modern day, she has been a part of some just straight up sucky teams. In 2013, she became a part of the second Doom Maidens team, team under Caroline LeFay, who were eventually able to resurrect Morgana Le Fay. And in 2018, she became a part of Namor the Submariner's Defenders of the Deep when he decided that land dwellers weren't allowed in the ocean, and she stayed part of that Atlantean team until she turned on Namor and challenged him for the Atlantean throne and got defeated by Ghost Rider when the Avengers showed up back in 2021. Now, the villain Dr. Bong was a goofy villain even during the Golden Age. He has a metal ball where his left hand should be, and he uses it to create concussive blasts by striking the appendage against his bell-shaped helmet. We actually have no idea how he came to become Dr. Bong, because his backstory mainly just touches on how he was a bullied kid who found power in writing and language, so then he became a very unethical reporter, and then tried to become a celebrity and joined up as a performer with a rock band where he would play different characters, and one of those performances got out of hand when his hand got cut off by a guillotine. I wish I was making that up. Now, chronologically, he then appeared in Howard the Duck number 15 in May of 1977 as Dr. Bong with random knowledge of biological engineering and sonics. He faced Howard and eventually She-Hulk, and then in 2010's Deadpool Volume 2, the villain was reimagined just a smidge bit more threateningly as Deadpool's former therapist and having cloned a team of superheroes, giving his clones regeneration abilities. He then joined a group called the Villains Anonymous, who all had run-ins with Spider-Man, and the last time he was seen was in 2014's Amazing Spider-Man Annual Volume 2, number 1. Now, this next one may be one of the more revolting villains out there, and it only gets worse when you learn that Douglas Carmody, the Bogeyman or Boogeyman, was a villain to the Power Pack, a group of kids. Carmody was in charge of the Carmody Research Labs, where Dr. James Power was working to perfect his antimatter power generator. When the Power Pack gained their abilities from the destruction of the generator, Carmody lost his job and essentially blamed the Power Pack for it all. Classic villain backstory. He then went on to hunt the Power Pack, considering them mutants even though they weren't. He stole a battlesuit from Project Pegasus, and using this suit to try and wipe out the Power Pack, he ended up coming into battle with Asgard's Warriors 3 and the New Mutants. Now, in Power Pack number 40, a demon named Nastir, I think is how you pronounce it, invaded New York City, and he turned several people, including Bogeyman or Boogeyman, into demons. And for Carmody, he basically embraced it completely, permanently staying as a demon while the others returned to normal. He tried to wipe out the Power Pack again with his new abilities, but then he saw himself in a reflection and went tumbling off a building. That was back in 1988. He appeared one more time in 1993's Cage Volume 1, number 19, facing Luke Cage, where he apparently passed away. But this isn't confirmed, and so he is basically considered missing, which isn't at all a pleasant thought. Now, similar to how the High Evolutionary created the New Men, he also created the Man-Beast from a red wolf that he genetically modified. However, unlike the New Men, Man-Beast was created using a new isotope which granted him a heightened physicality and enhanced mental capabilities, also granting him a greater level of ambition. He terrorized Counter-Earth, or more accurately, he led a revolt against the High Evolutionary, which, I mean, that isn't really so bad. That guy sucks. But he was eventually stopped by Thor before he could do real damage. He tried this 2 more times actually, being defeated by Wolverine and Kitty Pryde the first time, and then on Counter-Earth, he was stopped by Adam Warlock, who slightly devolved Man-Beast, which is kind of terrifying to think about. He would then return again on Earth as the Hate-Monger, having seemingly re-evolved back into his normal self, but then he was defeated by Spider-Man, and he was thought to be actually killed, but nope! He actually tried to stop the High Evolutionary again, infiltrating his Knights of Wonder-Gore in the late 90s. Unfortunately for the Man-Beast, the High Evolutionary and Quicksilver devolved him back into a wolf, but he's returned from that before, so who knows? Next up is the villain known as Belladonna. Belladonna was actually a Spider-Man villain, but it's more accurate to call her a villain to another Spidey villain, Roderick Kingsley, aka Hobgoblin. But before that ever happened, Belladonna was Narda Ravana, a European fashion designer. The problem was that Kingsley was another famous fashion designer, only one that stole from other designers. designers. Kingsley allegedly stole Ravonna's designs and marketed them in the United States, stealing her success, and for that, I guess he had to pay. Swearing vengeance, Narda assumed the guise of Belladonna and put together a small group of henchmen. She used toxic gas as her main tool, creating gas that could dissolve Spider-Man's webs, taking people's lives and having her henchmen dress as the Prowler to distract Spider-Man, all for the end goal of wiping out Kingsley from the face of the earth. The most ironic part of this whole situation, though, is that Belladonna just didn't have the popularity needed to be a lasting villain, getting arrested in 1980, while Kingsley, he became the Hobgoblin, and he's been causing problems all the way up until 2020 and is bound to come back at some point. Okay, so next up is a group of obscure villains made for the express purpose of facing another obscure group of heroes. Heavy Metal was a team made up of a group of cybernetically enhanced, super intelligent animals with weaponized exoskeletons. Can't get much more comic booky than that. Their team members included Armory, an octopus because arms, get it? Tail Gunner, a vulture, Bloodbath, a shark, Ramrod, a rhino, and they were led by Uproar, a blue-faced gorilla. Now this team was created by Adam Frost of Multicorp as a prototype, privately owned attack force set to oppose the team known as Brute Force, which is also a team of cybernetically enhanced super intelligent animals with weaponized exoskeletons. Also created by Multicorp, but they were created by Dr. Randall Pierce, and these guys were good. Except the problem is both of these teams were really just a part of Weapons Plus, the ones who created Captain America and eventually Wolverine, and they are not exactly the best people around. Heavy Metal was around for 4 issues of the Brute Force comic in 1990, and they have never been seen since. Remember back when I talked about Echidna or Echidna, and we talked about the Defenders of the Deep? Well, this team was basically filled with water-based villains that had nothing better to do, and one of them was a guy called Tiger Shark. So get this, Todd Arliss was a swimmer who took part in the Olympic Games. Cool. He ended up damaging his spinal cord when he rescued a drowning man. Dang. He was so desperate to regain his swimming ability that he then willingly participated in an experiment by the scientist Dr. Lemuel Dorcas. Interesting. The doctor blended Arliss's DNA with that of Namor the Submariner and a tiger shark, because of course he did. This experiment was totally successful, only it completely changed Arliss both physically and mentally. Now he had razor-sharp teeth and gills and had become savage and incredibly aggressive. He became a supervillain and named himself Tiger Shark, becoming an adversary for Namor the Submariner. Now, funnily enough though, after years and years of battling against Namor and the superhero community, he joined the Defenders of the Deep, and now he hasn't been seen since 2019 when they attacked an oil drilling platform in Alaska. And last up for today is Bram Velsing. For starters, he has an incredibly strange name that is very obviously a reference to Bram Stoker and his character Van Helsing. So, Bram Velsing, also known as Dread Knight, is better known as an enemy to Tony Stark in the Ultimate Universe. Unfortunately, in the 1610 universe, he just becomes another Iron Man villain that creates another Iron Man-like armor. But in Earth 616, Bram Velsing was actually a Latverian scientist who didn't like Dr. Doom's schemes and was punished by having a mask fused to his face. He became kind of like a villain, but also a servant to Dr. Doom in a way, allying himself with Victoria Frankenstein and the creations of Victor Frankenstein, which would make you think that he was actually a hero, but he was never played that way. He eventually moved on from being just a Dr. Doom villain and has gone on to fight Iron Man on a few occasions, as well as the Black Knight and Spider-Man. He was this really cool looking armored up man with an even cooler mask, wielding a super cool lance, riding a black winged horse. It was dope, but curiously, while he's never actually been sent to the afterlife, his last appearance was serving Dr. Doom in Iron Man Legacy Volume 1 Number 3 back in 2010, and he hasn't been seen since. Some of the best villains in DC Comics are actually the ones that don't get the most amount of time in the spotlight, but rest assured they will absolutely pummel you in one way or another, and today I think we're going to talk about some of them. Starting us off today is a little guy who goes by the name Dr. Psycho. Now, Wonder Woman, being a warrior-bound Amazon, sometimes daughter of Zeus, is one tough lady, and as you'd expect, a good chunk of her opponents are equally, if not more, physically intimidating and pack one heck of a punch. And then there's Dr. Psycho. Dr. Psycho is not physically intimidating at all. He is 3'9" with no kind of super strength. But what Dr. Psycho lacks in physicality, he makes up for in being absolutely psychotic, but also one of the strongest telepaths on the planet. Psycho can match up to Martian Manhunter in terms of his telepathic prowess, and can control multiple different minds with his powers at the same time. On top of that, he is just so incredibly sadistic. When combined with that absolute power, he can cause a bad day for even someone as capable as Wonder Woman. And before we move on, I'm curious, who are your favorite underappreciated villains in not just comics, but in any form of media? Let me know down in the comments below. But next up on the docket for today is Lord Deathman. The Japanese crime boss known as Lord Deathman has battled Batman both in American comics and in Japanese manga, using his powers to seemingly overcome death itself, able to rise from the grave no matter what his injuries are. In his first appearance in Batman 180 in May 1966, he passed away 3 times using a yogi technique to appear passed away before the final conflict, which saw him actually get struck by lightning and go on to the pearly gates. But since then, he has actually gained the real power to come back from the grave, but at the cost of having a bare-boned skull for a head. His regenerative abilities are so powerful that his fluids are used to create the infamous Lazarus pits that Ra's al Ghul uses to stay young and immortal. One of the first ways Batman defeated Lord Deathman with his new powers is honestly a little out of character for the Crusader. He threw Lord Deathman off of a building into the path of an armored car, which took the criminal down just long enough for Catwoman to lock him in a safe, and then he was shot out into space, and he still somehow came back. Next up is Rogal Zar. Rogal Zar is basically an alien warlord who was actually created by the papa of Superman, Jor-El. Rogal was responsible for destroying Krypton along with Empress Gandello of the Trillium Collective. He went on to later invade the Fortress of Solitude, and he destroyed the shrunken Kryptonian city of Kandor. Now, following a series of battles with Superman and Supergirl, the pair were only able to come out on top when the Girl of Steel used a Phantom Zone projector to send Zar to the Phantom Zone. Now, all of that is pretty impressive, but what really sold a lot of people on his actual raw power was later on, when Rogal escaped from the Phantom Zone, leading an army of criminals, including General Zod, who then turned on him. He did battle with Superman, Supergirl, General Zod, John Kent, and even Crypto the dog, all at the same time, until the Thanagarians showed up and put Zar in permanent stasis. Clifford Smek was a participant in a government experiment which caused him to tap into the quantum field, which allowed him to then manipulate dark matter. Now, we have no idea what that really means because we don't even really know what dark matter is, but in DC Comics, the dark matter in Major Force's body allows him to do incredible things like absorb energy, fly, regenerate, and even create light constructs like a Green Lantern can. Another side effect of all this concentrated energy inside of him means that he will go off like a nuclear boom boom if he is cut. That on its own is a huge power boost, simply because now, as a result, most superheroes can't even risk fighting Major Force, just in case they cut him. But then, on top of that, even if he does go off, ripping apart his own body on an atomic level, the dark matter that he controls will just put Major Force back together again. And that's not even everything. Not only is Major Force a physical threat, but he is also, just to top it off, a psychological genius. Simply by talking to the Green Lantern Kyle Rayner, Major Force convinced the superhero to give up his own power ring, the source of his power, and one of the most dangerous things in the universe. Prometheus is going to be up next on our list today, and heroes and villains with no powers always seem to be some of the most powerful. It's kind of strange. Prometheus, after seeing his criminal parents pass away at the hands of the police, he vows a vendetta on any form of justice, a vendetta that would push him to be able to defeat the entire Justice League single-handedly. He shot the Martian Manhunter with a dart that turned his powers against him and set him on fire. He infected Steel's armor with a computer virus which commanded the suit to damage the Watchtower. He hypnotized the Huntress into unconsciousness, attacked Green Lantern with a neural chaff that rendered his ring useless, Metropolis, he trapped the angel Zariel in limbo, tricked the Flash into believing that he had planted motion-sensitive devices that would just go off if the Flash used his powers, and he defeated Batman in hand-to-hand combat, which is nuts. His origin is very similar to Batman's. After his parents were dispatched from the mortal plane, he would travel the globe training and becoming the ultimate combat machine. But he also attended all the top universities, learning as much as he could. He eventually set up a base in the Ghost Zone, and from here he built an armor that could download information on any opponent's fighting style, kind of reminiscent of Taskmaster's ability from Marvel Comics. He is kind of crazy capable, but his vendetta on any kind of justice, plus his Batman likeness, just kind of makes him a little weird to me. Next up, we got Tattooed Man. Abel Tarrant was a sailor who discovered a strange chemical that could bring drawings to life. Now, realizing the potential this chemical had, he inked his entire body with it and became the supervillain Tattooed Man. While performing crimes, his ink actually comes to life to attack his enemies. Over the years, he has fought superheroes with tattoos of tigers, cars, ships, monsters, bears, fire, planes, and dinosaurs. He can even use a tattoo of wings to give himself the ability to fly. Tattoo Man has never been considered a super serious threat, but I think he should be, because he is only limited by his imagination. There is nothing stopping him from creating a tattoo of a nuclear boom boom or even a black hole. If he inked kryptonite onto his body, there's no reason that he couldn't take down Superman if he wanted to. Next up today is Dr. Sivana. It's almost ironic that some of the biggest and the strongest superheroes find their adversaries in the form of kind of creepy, somewhat old, bald men. Superman has Lex Luthor, who isn't old, but he is bald. And then for Shazam, he's got Dr. Sivana, who is indeed both old and bald. Sivana is not the kind of guy who's going to be engaging in a battle of fisticuffs, but that's fine because his strength is in the brain department. The villain doesn't have a ton of monumental feats, but one of his best comes to us in the Multiversity Thunderworld Adventures. In the opening pages of this comic, Sivana literally attacks the Rock of Eternity, which is the source of Shazam's powers and the home base for the wizard Shazam. This place has never ever been attacked for an eternity, and Sivana attacked it with a bigger Rock of Eternity, which is weird. He had his own Shazam-like team of superpowered children and his own multiversal duplicates helping him along. He manages to take the wizard Shazam prisoner and mine the rock for its own power, granting himself his own monstrous Shazam-like form, and it's crazy. Now, with a name like Psycho Pirate, it's easy to not take this villain too seriously, but Roger Hayden is quite the capable guy. Hayden wears a faceplate called the Medusa Mask, which can control the emotions of anyone nearby, and he staunchly believed that this was his ticket to riches and power. When heroes or the police try to stop his crime sprees, Psycho Pirate just uses his mask to overwhelm his opponents with shame, guilt, depression, or any other number of emotions. He can also make a person develop a phobia of anything he wants them to be afraid of. Like, in his debut issue, he made Dr. Fate, one of the most powerful magic users in DC Comics, develop cytophobia, aka the fear of food. And then he attacked Fate with a pizza. That's amazing! Psycho Pirate has played a huge part in some of the biggest DC comics ever, including Crisis on Infinite Earths and Infinite Crisis. If you needed more proof, Amanda Waller, the head of the Task Force X program, aka the Suicide Squad, has claimed that Psycho Pirate is one of the scariest beings in the universe, calling him, quote, a man who could make gods go mad, a man who could make the mad gods sane again. And in our second place today is Extant. Henry Hall, the brother of Donald Hall, aka Dove, started his comic book life as Hawk, being empowered alongside his brother by a Lord of Chaos and a Lord of Order who had fallen in love. Now, Henry represented chaos. Hawk and Dove together were vigilantes and were even part of the Teen Titans for a time. After the Crisis on Infinite Earths, however, in a dystopian near future that was home to a time-traveling hero called Wave Rider, Henry had become an oppressive tyrant named Monarch who ended up going back in time and fighting the modern-day heroes before he was wiped out by the Henry of the present day. I hope you can follow that because it was kind of hard for me to follow when I read it. Present-day Henry then took up the Monarch title and mantle in the modern day, becoming a villain. Now, eventually, Monarch stole the time powers from Wave Rider and then allied himself with Parallax, aka the corrupted Hal Jordan, and he took on the new villain name of Extant. While he was the front for Parallax's scheme to recreate the multiverse using alternate timelines, he tried tried to alter time to give himself an entire army of superheroes and found himself battling all the greatest members of the JSA. An extent tore through them all like they were a joke, and he even used his temporal powers to age up the members of the JSA that he didn't just straight up send to the afterlife. And lastly today, I think anyone who hasn't heard of this villain before would be forgiven. When you think of the most fearsome villains, specifically the villains of Captain Marvel, otherwise known as Shazam, you may not first think about the 7-inch long sentient worm from Venus known as Mr. Mind. This diabolically evil mind-controlling worm, after the events of Infinite Crisis, would cocoon himself and then emerge as a massive monstrosity capable of manipulating reality, consuming universes, and traveling through time and space. He was described as, quote, eating years and events from this universe's history, altering the Earth with every flap of his giant wings. It took a combined effort from Booster Gold, Supernova, and Skeets to defeat Mr. Mind by trapping him inside Skeets' shell, which was fortified by the Suspendium. Then, Booster Gold threw Skeets through time with the help of Supernova to the day that he was first discovered on Earth by Dr. Sivana, and then he's trapped in a time loop forever. So they didn't actually end him or defeat him, they just trapped him. This all-powerful, mind-controlling 7-inch long worm.